The dying binary stars of Celestria painted the crystal spires in shades of amber and crimson, their once brilliant light now flickering like candles in a cosmic wind. Zara Nightwhisper pressed her luminescent palm against the viewing portal of the evacuation center, watching the 19th transport attempt of the month sputter and fail on the launch pad below. Sparks cascaded from its engines like falling stars, and emergency crews rushed across the gleaming platform with practiced urgency. Her bioluminescent patterns shifted involuntarily deep blue for sorrow, flecked with the angry red of frustration. The Luminari couldn't hide their emotions the way other species could. Their feelings painted themselves across their translucent skin in living constellations of light. "The power couplings are failing faster than we can replace them," muttered Tam Silverstream, her childhood friend and fellow engineer. His own patterns showed exhausted gray-green, the color of hope deferred too many times. These ships were built with technology from before the quarantine. 30 years of isolation, and we're still using the same failing designs. Zara turned away from the window, her silver hair catching the ambient light from the crystal walls around them. At 28, she had never known a time when the Luminari weren't trapped in their dying system, cut off from the galactic community that had once welcomed them with open arms. The irony wasn't lost on her. A species that could naturally process and purify stellar radiation, exiled just when their binary stars began to destabilize. "The outer colonies are reporting increased stellar flares," announced Vex Dawntracker from across the command center. The young communications specialist's patterns flickered with barely contained panic. "The Meridian settlements have maybe 3 weeks before the radiation becomes lethal." "And the main colonies?" Zara asked, though she dreaded the answer. 6 months. Maybe less. The number hung in the air like a death sentence. 12 million Luminari souls scattered across 17 worlds and orbital stations, all dependent on the dying light of stars that had sustained their civilization for millennia. Their ancestors had built cities of pure crystal to capture and focus stellar energy, had evolved bodies that could drink starlight like others consumed water. Now that same dependence would be their doom. Zara moved to her engineering station, pulling up holographic displays of their evacuation fleet. 43 ships in various states of disrepair, most capable of carrying maybe a few thousand people each if they pushed life support to dangerous limits. The math was cruel and simple. They could save perhaps 2 million at most, leaving 10 million to face extinction when the stars finally collapsed. "What about the deep space scans?" she asked Vex. "Any response to our distress signals?" Vex's patterns dimmed to almost nothing, the Luminari equivalent of a bitter laugh. "The consortium monitoring stations are still active. Any ship that gets within 50 light years of our system receives the same message. Quarantine zone. Radiation contamination hazard. Approach forbidden by Galactic Consortium. Decree 2847. 30 years. 30 years since the accident that had changed everything. Zara had been born 2 years after the quarantine began, raised on stories of the time before, when Luminari ships had traded freely with dozens of species across the spiral arm. Her grandmother used to tell her about the great crystal markets of the inner worlds, where Luminari artisans had sold light sculptures that could burn for centuries without fuel. All of it lost because of one disastrous experiment with faster-than-light travel. The prototype drive had malfunctioned, sending waves of exotic radiation across 3 star systems. The Luminari had tried desperately to explain that the radiation was harmless, that their people actually purified it as it passed through their space. But fear had already taken root. The Galactic Consortium had declared them a contamination threat and sealed them away, leaving them to die slowly as their stars aged beyond their natural lifespans. A soft chime from the communication console interrupted her brooding thoughts. Vex looked up with confusion, painting orange swirls across his temples. "That's strange," he murmured. I'm detecting a transmission on the old exploration frequencies. Not consortium standard. Zara's heart skipped. Pirates? No ... double quotes. Vex's fingers danced across his controls, his bioluminescence brightening with excitement. This is different. The signal is too clean, too organized. And they're broadcasting identification codes. What kind of identification? Vex's patterns shifted to amazement, brilliant white pulses that lit up his entire body. They call themselves human. The word meant nothing to Zara. In 30 years of isolation, entire civilizations could have risen and fallen beyond their quarantine zone. New species could have achieved spaceflight, made first contact with the consortium, joined the galactic community that the Luminary had been exiled from. Are they responding to our distress calls? Zara asked, hardly daring to hope. I think so. They're broadcasting on multiple frequencies, asking if anyone needs assistance. Vex looked up at her with patterns of pure excitement. Zara, what if they don't know about the quarantine? What if they've never heard consortium propaganda about us? Before Zara could respond, Elder Nick Starweaver entered the command center. The ancient luminary's crystalline form was clouded with age, her once brilliant patterns now dim and flickering. But her mind remained sharp, and her expression was grave. I've been monitoring the transmissions, she said in her voice like distant music. These humans are either very brave or very foolish. The consortium doesn't take kindly to quarantine violations. We have to try, Zara said, her patterns blazing with determination. If there's even a chance, ... Elder Nix studied her for a long moment. Very well. But be careful, child. We've been disappointed by false hope before. Zara moved to the communication station, her heart pounding as she opened a channel. For 30 years, no one had answered their calls. No one had even acknowledged their existence. Now, somewhere in the void between dying stars, strangers who called themselves human were asking if anyone needed help. Unknown vessel, she transmitted, her voice steady despite the emotions painting rainbow patterns across her skin. This is Zara Nightwhisper of the Luminary people. We received your offer of assistance. We desperately need help. The response came faster than she had expected, the voice warm and concerned in a way that made something flutter in her chest. This is Captain Marcus Webb of the independent freighter Wandering Star. We read you, Zara. What's your emergency? The way he said her name, with careful pronunciation and genuine interest, made her bioluminescence pulse with something she couldn't quite identify. Our star system is dying, Captain Webb. We have perhaps 6 months before our worlds become uninhabitable. We need help evacuating 12 million people. There was a long pause. When the human voice returned, it carried a note of shock and something else determination. 12 million. That's a massive undertaking. But if you need help, we'll find a way. Can you guide us to your location? We're coming in. Captain Webb, Zara said urgently, her patterns shifting to warning colors. You need to understand the risk. The Galactic Consortium has declared this system under quarantine. Any unauthorized ship that enters risks being destroyed. Why would they quarantine a dying system? Came the puzzled reply. Zara exchanged glances with Elder Nix, who nodded slowly. How much truth could they risk? If these humans learned about the radiation and fled like everyone else, this chance would be lost forever. There was an accident 30 years ago, she said carefully. Radiation was released. But it's not what the consortium claims. We can explain everything if you're willing to listen. We're listening, Marcus Webb said without hesitation. And we're on our way. Send us coordinates for a safe landing site. As Zara transmitted the landing coordinates with trembling hands, her patterns blazed with something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Outside the crystal windows, the dying stars continued their slow fade toward darkness. But for the first time since childhood, She believed that she might live to see sunrise on a different world. The human ship Wandering Star appeared on their sensors an hour later, a sleek silver needle threading through the debris of their outer system. Whatever happened next would determine whether the luminary faced extinction or found salvation in the most unlikely of places. Zara watched the ship descend and felt her bioluminescence singing with anticipation. The humans had come. Now everything would change. Marcus Webb stepped out of his ship's transport pod and felt the breath leave his lungs. The luminary city stretched before him like something from a fever dream, towers of living crystal that caught the dying light of the binary stars and transformed it into cascades of color that danced across every surface. The very air seemed to shimmer with captured starlight, and the ground beneath his feet hummed with a resonance he could feel in his bones. Sweet mother of ... Nina Rossetti whispered beside him, her medical scanner forgotten in her hand as she stared at the impossible architecture. Marcus, this is beyond anything in the databases. He nodded mutely, unable to find words. After 15 years of hauling cargo between forgotten colonies and backwater stations, he thought he'd seen everything the galaxy had to offer. But this was art made manifest, beauty carved from light itself. Welcome to Celestria. The voice made him turn, and Marcus felt his heart skip in a way that had nothing to do with alien atmosphere or reduced gravity. The woman approaching them moved like poetry in motion, her translucent form catching and refracting the ambient light into patterns that seemed to pulse with her heartbeat. She was tall and graceful, with features that were almost human, but refined into something more ethereal. Her hair flowed like liquid silver, and her skin ... Her skin was painted with living light. Patterns of bioluminescence swirled across her arms and face soft blues and gentle golds that shifted and flowed as she moved. Marcus found himself mesmerized by the way the colors seemed to respond to her emotions, brightening when she spoke, dimming when she paused. "I'm Zara Nightwhisper," she said, extending her hand in a gesture that seemed both alien and familiar. "Thank you for coming, Captain Webb." When their hands touched, Marcus felt a jolt that had nothing to do with static electricity. Her skin was warm, almost feverish, and where their palms met, her bioluminescence flared into brilliant gold. She gasped softly and pulled back, her patterns shifting to what looked like embarrassment rose-colored swirls that painted her cheeks with living blushes. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "Sometimes the patterns react ... unexpectedly." "It's beautiful," Marcus said honestly, and watched her luminescence pulse brighter at his words. "I'm Marcus. This is Nina Rossetti, my ship's medic." Nina stepped forward with her professional smile, though Marcus caught the sharp look she gave him. They'd known each other for 8 years, ever since she joined his crew after her research grant was canceled. She could read him better than most. "Thank you for trusting us enough to let us land," Nina said warmly. Not many species would take the risk. Zara's patterns shifted to something Marcus was beginning to recognize as sadness deep blue waves that made her look ethereal and melancholy. Not many species have been desperate enough to try. "Come, let me show you what we're dealing with." She led them through streets filled with luminari going about their daily lives. Children played games that involved creating light patterns with their hands, their laughter like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Adults worked on repairs to buildings and vehicles, their bodies glowing brighter as they absorbed energy from their tools. Everyone they passed stopped to stare at the humans with curious, hopeful eyes, their bioluminescence flickering with excitement. "Your people seem remarkably calm for a civilization facing extinction," Nina observed. "We've had 30 years to accept our fate," Zara replied, her patterns dimming. "When your ship arrived yesterday, many couldn't believe it. Some still think you're not real." "We're real," Marcus said softly, and something in his tone made Zara look at him with surprise. Her patterns shifted to warm amber curiosity, mixed with something else he couldn't identify. I know what it's like to lose everything, to feel like the universe has forgotten you exist. They entered a large building at the city center, its crystal walls filled with displays showing star charts, population counts, and ship designs. Dozens of luminari worked at stations filled with equipment that seemed to blend art and science into something beautiful and functional. This is our evacuation planning center, Zara explained, her voice taking on a professional tone that couldn't quite hide the underlying desperation. We've been working on escape plans for decades. The problem is, we don't have enough ships or resources to save everyone. Marcus studied the displays with growing amazement. The technology was unlike anything he'd ever seen. Organic curves that seemed grown rather than built. Power systems that pulsed with living light. How does it all work? A younger luminari approached them, tall and lean, with patterns that reminded Marcus of ocean waves. "I'm Tam Silverstream," he said, his voice carrying undertones of suspicion as he looked at Marcus. "We process stellar radiation naturally. Our bodies convert it into usable energy. That's why we built our cities to focus starlight, why our ships run on solar collectors." "That's fascinating," Nina said, pulling out her medical scanner. "Would you mind if I ran some tests?" "Nothing invasive, just external scans." Tam looked to Zara, who nodded. As Nina worked, her expression grew more and more amazed. "This is incredible," she murmured. "Your cellular structure actually breaks down radiation and converts it to pure energy. But it's not just absorption, you're processing it, changing it into something completely different." "What kind of different?" Marcus asked. Nina looked up with excitement, lighting her eyes. "They're not just processing radiation, they're purifying it, taking dangerous particles and converting them into harmless energy signatures. Marcus, if I'm reading this right, they're actually making space safer just by existing in it." Zara's patterns shifted to deep blue again. "That's what we tried to tell the consortium 30 years ago. Our accident didn't spread contamination, it spread purified radiation. That was actually beneficial to surrounding systems." "You mean you were helping other worlds?" Marcus asked, anger beginning to build in his chest. "We tried to explain," Tam said, his patterns flashing with bitterness. "No one would listen. The consortium had already decided we were dangerous." Marcus felt sick. These people, this beautiful, gentle species that literally cleaned up the galaxy's radiation, had been condemned to death because someone was too afraid or too greedy to listen to the truth. "We need to get you out of here," he said firmly. "All of you." Zara's patterns blazed with hope and desperation. 12 million people, Captain. Your ship ... double quotes. Can't carry that many, I know. But I can call in favors. There are other independent traders, colony ships that might help if they knew the truth. The consortium monitors all communications, Tam warned, moving closer to Zara in a way that made Marcus's chest tighten with an emotion he didn't want to examine too closely. Any large-scale rescue attempt would be detected and stopped. "Then we'll have to be smart about it," Marcus said, his mind already racing with possibilities. "What if we started small? A few ships at a time, spread out over weeks?" As they talked, Marcus found his attention repeatedly drawn to Zara, the way her patterns shifted with her emotions, the musical quality of her voice, the grace with which she moved through the crystal halls of her dying city. When their eyes met, her bioluminescence would flare into warm gold, and he felt an answering warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with alien biology. Nina noticed, of course. She always did. "Marcus," she said quietly, when Zara moved to check on something at another station. "We need to be careful here." "Careful about what?" "About getting emotionally involved. These people are desperate. They'll see rescue where there might only be false hope." Marcus watched Zara across the room, her silver hair catching the light as she worked with focused intensity. Her patterns were cycling through soft blues and gold's determination, mixed with something that looked like joy. "And what if it's not false hope?" he asked. "What if we can actually help them?" Nina followed his gaze and sighed. "Marcus, when's the last time you were planetside for more than a supply run? When's the last time you let yourself get close to anyone?" The question hit closer to home than he wanted to admit. Since losing his family in the Titan colony disaster 8 years ago, he'd kept moving, kept distance between himself and anything that might hurt to lose. Space was vast and cold, but it was also safe. No attachments, no responsibilities beyond his crew and cargo. But looking at Zara, seeing the desperate hope in her luminescent patterns, feeling the way his heart raced when she smiled at him, ... Maybe safety wasn't worth the price he'd been paying. Captain Webb? Zara had returned, her patterns showing curiosity mixed with concern. "Is everything all right?" "Just thinking about logistics," he lied smoothly. "When can you show me your ships? I want to see what we're working with." Her face lit up literally, her bioluminescence flaring into brilliant gold and white. "Right now, if you'd like." "The shipyards are just beyond the city." As they prepared to leave, Tam moved close to Zara and spoke quietly in their musical language. Marcus couldn't understand the words, but the tone was clearly protective, warning. Zara responded with flashing patterns of annoyance, her color shifting to red and orange. "Tam thinks I'm being naive," she said to Marcus with a rueful smile. "He says I'm trusting strangers too quickly." "Maybe you are," Marcus admitted. "But maybe that's exactly what the situation calls for." Their eyes met and held, and Marcus felt something shift in his chest, like tectonic plates finding new alignment. Zara's patterns cycled through gold and silver, beautiful and complex, and he realized with startling clarity that he would do anything to keep those lights from fading into darkness. Outside, the dying stars painted the crystal city in shades of amber and rose, and somewhere in the distance, another transport ship was powering up for a test flight. Time was running out for the Luminari, but for the first time in years, Marcus felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Beside him, Nina watched Zara lead them toward the shipyards, her expression thoughtful and sad. She'd worked with Marcus long enough to recognize the signs, and she knew that whatever happened next would change everything between them. The heart, she reflected, was a treacherous thing. It always chose the most impossible moments to remind you that you were still alive. The crystal gardens of Celestria bloomed with dying light, their transparent petals catching the last rays of the binary stars and transforming them into cascades of rainbow fire. Marcus walked beside Zara through paths that sparkled like captured starlight, his heart racing not from the thin atmosphere, but from the woman whose bioluminescence painted the garden in living gold. They had been meeting like this for 3 days now, stolen moments between evacuation planning sessions where Marcus could learn about Luminari culture and Zara could share the stories of her people. Tonight felt different, though charged with unspoken possibilities that made her patterns dance with nervous energy. "Tell me about the patterns," Marcus said softly as they paused beside a fountain that sang with crystalline music. "What do the colors mean?" Zara's luminescence shifted to soft pink embarrassment mixed with pleasure. "It's single quotes S. complicated. Blues are for sadness, golds for joy or attraction, red for anger or passion. But they blend, change meaning based on context." She looked up at him, her patterns cycling through warm amber. "Your people must think us terribly transparent." "I think you're beautiful," Marcus said simply, and watched her flare into brilliant gold and silver. "I think honesty is a gift most species have forgotten how to give." She stopped walking, turning to face him fully. In the garden's ethereal light, she looked like something from a dream, translucent and luminous, her hair flowing like liquid mercury. "Marcus, what happens when the evacuation is complete?" When we reach safe worlds and rebuild our lives? The question hung between them like a bridge. Neither was sure they should cross. Marcus reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and touched her cheek. Her skin was warm, almost feverish, and where his fingers made contact, her bioluminescence blazed into patterns so complex and beautiful, they took his breath away. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I know I want to find out." Their first kiss tasted like starlight and possibility, her luminescence painting them both in waves of gold and white that pulsed with their heartbeats. When they finally broke apart, Zara's patterns were cycling through colors Marcus had never seen before, deep purples and silver that seemed to carry meanings beyond words. "The bonding patterns," she whispered, wonder in her voice. "I've never?" "These only appear when ... double quotes. When what?" Marcus asked, though part of him already knew. "When we find our life mate," she said, her patterns flaring even brighter. "Marcus, this is happening so fast ... Sometimes the heart doesn't keep human schedules," he said, pulling her closer. "Or luminary ones, I'd guess. They might have talked more about the implications, might have explored the impossible beauty of love found in the shadow of extinction." But Nina's voice crackled through Marcus's community. "Marcus, you need to get back here immediately. We found something." The urgency in her tone cut through the romantic haze like a blade. Marcus and Zara exchanged glances, her patterns shifting to worried blue, and they hurried back through the crystal streets to the evacuation center. They found Nina hunched over her portable lab equipment in a side chamber, her face grim as she studied data streams. Beside her stood Elder Voss Moonbinder, an ancient luminary whose crystalline form was so clouded with age he looked like living smoke. His patterns were dim but steady, the deep wisdom of centuries mixed with profound sadness. "What did you find?" Marcus asked. "The truth about the quarantine," Nina said, not looking up from her screens. "And it's worse than we thought." She activated holographic display showing medical scans, energy readings, and what looked like economic projections. "I've been analyzing the radiation signature from 30 years ago, comparing it to current luminary bioemissions." "Marcus, the accident didn't create contamination. It created a purification wave that cleaned up decades of industrial pollution in 3-star systems. We tried to tell them," Elder Voss said, his voice like wind through distant crystals. "The radiation was beneficial. Crop yields in the affected systems increased by 400%. Cancer rates dropped to almost nothing. But fear is stronger than facts. There's more," Nina continued. "I managed to tap into some old consortium databases through their monitoring stations. The quarantine wasn't about safety, it was about economics." She pulled up financial records that made Marcus's blood run cold. The Zephyrian Syndicate controls 80% of medical treatment in the affected sectors. They also dominate energy production through artificial scarcity. If the luminary's natural radiation purification became widely known ... it would destroy their profit margins overnight, Marcus finished, fury building in his chest. 12 million people condemned to death for corporate greed. Zara's patterns had shifted to deep, red anger mixed with betrayal. "All these years, we thought we were dangerous. We accepted exile because we believed we were a threat to other species. You were a threat," Elder Voss said sadly. "Just not the kind you thought. Your people represent everything the consortium fears a species that solves problems, instead of profiting from them." "That's not the worst part," Nina said quietly. She activated another display showing current consortium fleet movements. "I've been monitoring their communications. They know we're here, Marcus. A syndicate patrol detected our ship's energy signature when we entered the system." Marcus felt the world tilt around him. "How long do we have?" 18 hours, maybe less. And Marcus, they're not coming to talk. The orders I intercepted were clear: eliminate all witnesses and maintain Quarantine integrity. The silence that followed was broken only by the distant hum of the crystal city around them. Zara's bioluminescence had faded to almost nothing, her patterns cycling through grays and blacks colors Marcus had never seen before, emotions too dark for his understanding. "I'll destroy your ship," she said finally, "and everyone on it. You should leave now, while you still can." "Not without you," Marcus said immediately. Marcus ... quotes Nina started. "No." His voice carried a finality that surprised even him. "I'm not running. Not this time." He thought of the Titan colony disaster 8 years ago, how he'd been off-world on a supply run when the reactor failed, how he'd returned to find his wife Sarah and daughter Emma among the 8,000 dead, casualties of corporate cost-cutting and regulatory corruption. He'd run, then thrown himself into the endless void between stars, rather than face the pain of staying. But looking at Zara, seeing the hopeless grief in her fading patterns, he knew he couldn't run again. Some things were worth standing and fighting for, even if the odds were impossible. "There has to be a way," he said. "What about the other ships in the evacuation fleet? Can they fight? Against consortium battle cruisers?" Tam Silverstream had entered the chamber, his patterns flashing with bitter resignation. "Our ships are transports, Marcus. They were never designed for combat. Then we get creative," Marcus said. "What are our advantages? What do we have that they don't expect?" Elder Voss stepped forward, his ancient eyes gleaming with something that might have been hope. "Knowledge," he said simply. "We know this system better than any outsiders. We know the radiation patterns, the gravitational anomalies, the places where even the best sensors go blind. And we have the truth," Zara added, her patterns brightening slightly. "Other species don't know what really happened 30 years ago. If we could get that information out ... The consortium controls most communication networks," Nina pointed out. "But there are independent colonies, free traders, even some sympathetic worlds in syndicate space. If we could reach them ... double quotes." Marcus felt a plan beginning to form, dangerous and desperate, but maybe their only chance. "How many people can we evacuate before the fleet arrives?" "Maybe 50,000, Tam said. "If we push the ships beyond safe limits, then that's what we do," Marcus decided. "We save who we can, and we make sure the truth survives, even if we don't." Zara's hand found his, her fingers intertwining with his, as her bioluminescence flared back to life gold and silver, and that deep purple that spoke of bonds deeper than words. "Together," she said simply. "Together," he agreed. Outside the crystal windows, the dying stars continued their ancient dance toward darkness. But in the evacuation center, hope blazed with the light of a dozen species working toward a common goal. They had 18 hours to change everything, to turn certain defeat into possible victory. As the night deepened and the binary stars set over the crystal spires of Celestria, Marcus held Zara close and watched her people prepare for the fight of their lives. Tomorrow would bring fire and judgment, but tonight they had love and truth, and the unbreakable determination of hearts that had found each other across the impossible void. The consortium was coming with ships and guns and the weight of a corrupt system behind them. But they didn't understand what they were facing, not just refugees fleeing a dying world, but an entire species willing to fight for the right to exist, guided by the love between a human cargo pilot and a luminary engineer whose bioluminescent dreams painted the darkness with impossible light. Whatever came next, they would face it together.